In this video, we are going to be covering basic opening principles to help you get a good position in the first several moves of a chess game without having to memorize a bunch of theory. So, the opening is the first few moves of a chess game that the players make that will sort of determine the structure of the rest of the game. These principles will sort of give you the why behind the different moves and different openings, and so as you start going and learning and memorizing different opening lines, these will sort of be a baseline for you to go back to. If you forget a specific line or a specific move order, you'll still be able to get a good position in the first few moves. So in the opening phase of the game, there are 3 things that you need to accomplish in order to consider it a successful opening. So these are the 3 rules. First of all, you need to control the center. Second, you need to develop all of your pieces. And finally, you need to get your king to safety, usually by castling. There's also sort of a 4th bonus rule, which is you don't want to lose any material or lose the game. So you need to be reacting to your opponent's moves in addition to those first 3 things. So rule number 1 is control the center. So what does that mean? So the center is considered these 4 squares. So that's why a lot of openings start with either this pawn forward or this pawn forward. If possible, you want to put both of these pawns forward. If your opponent lets you, that would be like perfect. That would be an ideal world. Okay, but a lot of times they will meet, for example, the move d4 with this move d5, right? So they are controlling an equal number of squares on your side, and you are controlling the same number of squares on their side. Okay, so we're fighting for the center right away. So another principle that you'll hear that sort of goes along with this is that you always want to capture towards the center. Now, this isn't like a hard and fast rule. There are situations where this is not the case. But if possible, you want to keep these pawns in the center on the D and E files because it will help you control a lot of crucial space in the center of the board. So for example, if we get a Sicilian, this is the Sicilian, we can play something called the Alapin, where we're immediately going to fight for this square and try to get our 2 pawns in the center. So if black, for example, plays here, we can immediately push, and now if black takes, we take control of the entire center. We're very happy with these 2 pawns here, and then we'll continue with our development. So if you've studied openings at all, you'll know that there are some openings that don't necessarily follow these rules. They don't put a pawn in the center right away, but instead they try to fight for the center in other ways a little further into the game. An example of this is the King's Indian defense, where we will go here, here, and we will fianchetto our bishop. You'll see that this, on this beautiful long diagonal, will eventually fight for some of these center squares over here. And then we will, of course, castle, and you can play this against pretty much anything that white does. As you get more advanced, you'll have to obviously memorize some more critical lines of theory. But this is honestly a good starting setup-based opening because the plans are pretty simple. You'll either want to push the E pawn forward or the C pawn forward, and in the early middle game, you'll be fighting for the center in that way instead of doing it right at the very beginning. So rule number 2 is we need to develop all of our pieces. We don't want them to be sitting here on the back rank because they can't do anything. They're not participating in any kind of attack or defense when they're just sitting back here. And there is a certain order that is good to develop your pieces in. That is, you first want to develop your minor pieces, and usually the knights will go first, but that, as we'll see, isn't always the case. But knights and bishops out, we want to move each of our minor pieces once before we move any of them twice. That is a general rule. Obviously, there are some openings where, again, that is not the case, but in general, you want to move all of your minor pieces once before you move any of them twice. And then we want to connect our rooks, and we want to develop our rooks by getting them still on the back rank, but getting them to open files or files that will potentially open in the future. So let's look at this in pretty much the only opening I play these days, which is the London. It's a setup-based opening for the most part. For this, we'll just look at sort of the setup. It goes like this. We will develop all our pieces like this and create sort of this pawn chain. And notice all of the minor pieces are out and they are on good squares, right? Our bishop isn't like back here. It's out and it's controlling a lot of space in the center. Next, we will castle, and then we can move our queen. Again, it kind of depends on what the opponent plays, but let's just say we move it here to connect the 2 rooks. In the London, if you play a bunch of games, you'll know that usually the C file is the one that opens up, and so usually I like to put my rook here if I've got nothing better to do. Usually black will play this, and we can take towards the center and have this nice open file where we can double eventually. Also notice that all of my pieces are taking squares in the center and controlling a lot of space down the middle of the board. So I didn't put my knight over here, I didn't put this knight over on this square. Knights on the rim are grim or dim, whatever version of the saying you've heard. Notice if I develop this knight over here, for example, it only controls a couple of squares, and they're not center squares. They're kind of irrelevant. Furthermore, if black eventually pushes this, they can capture, and we will suddenly have double pawns on the side of the board, which is also not good. So we really want our pieces, even though this piece looks like it's not doing too much, it's still taking control of these squares, and it will eventually take the space of this knight. So we want our pieces all coordinated. That will really help as we're moving into the middle game to start sort of thinking about plans and ideas for an attack just by looking at the squares that your pieces are already holding down. One more thing to notice, as we're developing our pieces, we want to put them on squares where they are protected, usually by a pawn. Okay, so for example, this bishop, protected by a pawn. This knight is held down really well by these pawns. Okay, once we move here, this is sort of the middle game plan in the London in general. Everything is just held together by all these pawns, okay? If we've just got a piece floating off in the middle of nowhere, it's really easy for the opponent to create a double threat that will win that loose piece. So all of your pieces being protected really helps with the coordination of them, and it also just sort of gives you peace of mind. It gives you less to think about as you're sort of thinking of your middle game plan. It means that all of your pieces are safe, they're usually on good squares if they are protected, and it will really help you going forward. Our third rule is we need to get our king to safety by castling, and you'll see this really goes hand in hand with the second rule because you need to get these pieces out in order to castle. So let's flip the board and look at this in the context of a different opening. Let's use the Queen's Gambit Declined as an example. So right away, any kind of gambit opening is one where your opponent will give up a pawn or sometimes even a piece. There's some crazy lines out there, but they'll give up a pawn in order to create some kind of winning initiative or a strong attack, and it can be kind of confusing or tricky if you're not exactly sure what you're doing. So let's look instead at the Queen's Gambit Declined, where you play like this. White can go here. Notice everybody's developing their pieces, and we can castle. So this king is very safe over here. This knight is really nice here. We don't necessarily want to move it because it covers this square. So if white decides to go here and create this battery, we can leave this knight here, and there's really no way for white to ever take this unless they add another attacker. And if they do that, say we'll develop normally, if they do that, we can just kick them out and we're all good. We're all safe over here. So going along with this rule is another one, which is you do not usually want to push the pawns in front of your castled king, because the whole point of castling your king over here is to keep these pawns right in front of it so that it's very well protected and there are no open gaping holes where white can sneak in on the diagonals or, get some pieces in. These pawns do a really nice job of holding everything together and preventing your opponent from making any kind of progress until much later in the game when you do want to start pushing your pawns. But what you don't want to be doing is pushing forward like this. This is not good, right? White can very easily just sacrifice things over here to get rid of two of these pawns for a piece and then bring in the queen, and it can be all over in a couple of moves. So a final piece of bonus advice is that you have to be able to react to what your opponent is doing. In this video, I showed a lot of setup-based openings and even some where I didn't move the opponent's pieces just to sort of show the setup from our side, but that's not how an actual game of chess works, right? Your opponent will be making moves just as much as you are. A lot of times, if you memorize an opening line, you'll go to play it and you will find that up until a certain level, you will not get those lines at all. Your opponent will not play anything like you're expecting, and you have to be able to deal with the unexpected very soon in the game. So a lot of times one of the scariest things is when your opponent brings out their queen early, right? This is usually called the wayward queen attack, and it can be kind of scary if you're not sure what you're doing, but the thing is with moves that you usually don't see is that they're usually not very good. So as long as you can hold everything together, prevent any kind of checkmates, and just get your king to safety, you should be fine, and in fact, you should be much better because you'll be able to quickly start attacking your opponent's queen if that's what they brought out, get their queen on kind of a weird square and prevent them from developing their own pieces, and you'll very quickly be able to create your own initiative against your opponent's king. So I think I was 700 about in this game, and I was playing the fried liver at this point. This is one example of an opening where you're not sticking to the principle of not moving a piece twice because you're going for this pawn here where you will be forking these two pieces. There's also some lines where you take here instead. But anyway, I'm sure I didn't know the specifics at this level because this is a big mistake, but instead I kept going for the plan. So black saved the queen, right, by moving it here, but I'm still attacking the rook, which was the whole point of putting this knight here. So I took the rook. Now, keen players will notice that there is a very large problem with this, and that is that the queen and the knight are teaming up on a very weak square right next to our king, and I got checkmated on the next move. So as soon as your opponent plays something weird, I don't think I'd ever seen this move before, and I was looking back through my game database, and this exact same thing happened to me like 3 games later, so I definitely didn't learn my lesson. But if you see this weird move, right, you have to look at what exactly it's attacking. Okay, it's attacking my knight, but the queen's not going to take that and give up the queen for 2 minor pieces. That's just not going to happen. What else is the queen attacking of mine? Well, it's looking right here, and okay, is that a problem? Well, my king is protecting, but the problem is that it is attacked twice, okay? So a better move here would have just been to castle. And now we're still following our opening principles. We've gotten our king to safety, and, well, I guess this wasn't necessarily the greatest opening principle, but we'll eventually develop our other pieces, and we will go like this and probably kick this queen back and potentially even trap it at a certain point. Again, it's also so important to remember to pay attention to what your opponent is doing and not just be focused on what you're doing for the first like 10 moves of the game and then actually start thinking. You have to start thinking right away from move 1. Even as you're starting to learn different openings or trying out different lines, maybe different tricks or traps or just generally new positions, I hope these opening principles help you understand sort of the why behind the moves that you're making and maybe help you play it a little bit more by the seat of your pants if you're not exactly sure what you should be doing. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, please consider subscribing and let me know what other kind of chess content you want to see. I'll see you soon!